I'm going to start off with 2 confessions and 2 suggestions. So my first confession is this. I'm a debate junkie. I love debate. Debate has shaped my life. It has shaped my academic work as well. When I was in college and when I went to PhD school, I majored in political science, focused on comparative politics and international relations, all because of interests that were piqued by my participation in debate. And so although I'm certainly not an expert on China, one of the things that I love about new topics, especially foreign policy topics, is the ability to learn more. And I'll share kind of throughout this next hour or so some of the things that even as somebody who's got a PhD in comparative politics, teaches China as a part of a couple of my classes, stuff that I didn't know. And so I would encourage you to try to be intellectually curious about this stuff, because it's really potentially going to help to not only shape your debate success, but might also help you in other ways as well. So my second confession is that one of the challenges about a topic like this is the pronunciation of things. You're being asked to pronounce phonetically translated from a whole different language into really fast-paced debate stuff, right? And that can be really challenging. How many of you have ever been in a debate where somebody stumbled over a name that was a translated name? You know you've done it. What do people normally do when that happens? They get all giggly, or they're whatever, or it doesn't matter. Well, it actually does matter. You should in fact try to pronounce people's names correctly, because that's just kind of the right thing to do. But what else does it do when you hear somebody stumble over words like that? What does it do to their credibility? Does it increase it or decrease it? Yeah, it totally tanks it, right? And so you should embrace the word ethos and get some. And one of the ways that you should get some ethos is to actually be able to pronounce some names and stuff. So, because pronunciation is hard, I am here to help. Oh, by the way, People's Republic of China, if people is in the name of a country, it's probably not democratic. Does that make sense? It's just kind of a truism about geography. So, I'm here to help with this pronunciation business. This is one of those things that I discovered as I was just kind of doing some random topic research. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's a government-sponsored kind of radio thing called Voice of America. And they apparently used to have a system where they would sort of write out on index cards for their radio announcers. They would write out on the index cards how to say particular names. And so if somebody was going to do a story about China, for example, they'd have to go to this filing cabinet and go through the cards and pull out the index cards to read from it. Seems crazy to me. So what they did in the early 2000s was they actually loaded up audio clips of pronunciation for people's names, regions, etc. And so if you were in here earlier where the really loud man's voice said a name, that was this. So you can see a little bit here that you can browse by region. And so you can go to China, maybe. And then they have a bunch of, this is a political activist. They have obviously Beijing as cities. They also have other controversial figures like Bo, as well as the leaders of the country. And you just click on it.
Bo Chi Ma.
And it'll tell you what the pronunciation is. And so this is a way, if you encounter particular names and you're hey, I got told I should embrace some ethos, this is a way that you can try to figure out what some of that is. Alright, so those were my 2 confessions. I'm a junkie and debate is hard. So now a couple of suggestions. My first suggestion is you should take notes on these topic lectures. And the reason why I would say that, I might even suggest to you taking notes in a notebook as opposed to your computer where there are distractions and whatnot. But the purpose of taking notes can be to help you to generate ideas later. You don't know if you hear something today from John Turner's lecture about economic reforms and you're reading an article later, you might be able to sort of sync those things up in your brain and come up with a really innovative argument idea. And so it's important to take notes during these lectures. You don't have a ton of them, but I would really encourage you to do that. The second reason to take notes is you can write blocks out of them. Right, this is especially true for some of your electives. If you take an elective on speeches or counterplans or something, you could turn those into blocks. And so I'd encourage you to do that. My second suggestion is that you really should try to ask questions whenever possible. Now, some of you deep within your being are frightened, just generally, but also maybe frightened of asking questions because you think that you might be like annoying to people. I think on the whole, everybody here is here because they are also debate junkies and are very happy to answer your questions. And so you should kind of keep that in mind. And that goes back to that intellectual curiosity stuff that I was talking about. So, any questions so far? All right. So, I want to talk about a couple of principles in PRC governance. I'm going to use some similar language and also some different language from John Turner's lecture. A lot of the foundation and the history really does inform the ways in which the CCP and the PRC government operate. So I want to talk about some fundamental principles and how the PRC is governed and how the CCP governs as well. By the way, the acronyms on this topic are dizzying. So you got to make sure you know what your acronyms are. I'm going to talk about NPC as an acronym later, which can actually mean two different things, one in the Communist Party and one in the government. So you got to make sure you know your acronyms. But CCP is the Chinese Communist Party. So these are a couple of the principles that govern the ways in which the PRC operates. So the first is that the CCP makes China a one-party dominant system. And that's actually a term of art. It describes countries where, well, there's one party that's dominant. And so that can happen in democratic countries like South Africa, for example. The ANC has a lot of political hegemony, and so it is basically a one-party dominant system, even though it's a democratic system. So in China, the one-party dominant system doesn't mean that there aren't other parties, which is a little bit like wacky given our kind of construction of China. There are actually what are called 8 dwarf parties. That translation again, you know, I don't know how precise the dwarf part is in the translation, but so there are some parties, and that allows the CCP to be like, so, you know, we got these other parties. It's not all us, but really it is. And the reason why it is there are basically no other legitimate means of political participation. In other words, if you want to accomplish something, you either have to go through the vehicle of the CCP or it has to be authorized. John mentioned the environmental problems that exist in China. Have you all heard about that before? There's some study out in the last year where it's like if you live in Beijing for like a year, it knocks off like 3 years of your life. Just like that's like intense, to me at least. Maybe not to you, you did not read it. So the idea that environmental groups are starting to challenge the quality of the environment in China can only happen because the CCP allows it to happen. Sometimes they'll allow stuff to happen and then they'll crack down. In 2010, there was a really big earthquake in the Sichuan province. It came to light that there was a lot of corruption in the building of schools in the region, and a bunch of school children died. Families mobilized to try to protest the corruption. And at first, the government let that happen. But then when it started to get a little bit too politically participatory, they cracked down on the protesters, and they did that by saying, we got this. We'll handle the corruption, we're the CCP, it's all good, we got you. And so this is important, as we'll talk about in a moment, for different threats to CCP stability. The second implication of the one-party dominant system is that really, in my opinion, the ideology component of the CCP is way overstated. And what I mean by that is, even though communist is in the name, as you heard, once the market reforms started with Deng Xiaoping, there really was a significant move away from communist ideology, or what we consider to be traditional communist ideology. This is significant because threats to the stability of the CCP are met with technocratic resistance. What do you think I mean by technocratic? Yeah?
There's a small group of people that have more advanced technology than the rest of the people that enables them to govern.
That's a really good start to a definition. So, small group of people doing stuff that other people can't do. Doesn't necessarily mean they have better technology or access to technology. If somebody can really technically do something, like a technically proficient debater, what makes for a technically proficient debater? Yeah, they do line by line, they're like real efficient at word economy, things like that. So I promise this is analogous. So the CCP is kind of like a really efficient debater in the sense that if they are met with resistance or protest, then the CCP is very much willing to say, we're going to adopt these bureaucratic approaches and we're going to fix this problem. And this actually stems from way back history with Confucius. Have y'all ever heard of Confucius? Okay, so he was like a philosopher in China. He also was sort of started something called scholar bureaucrat. And this idea of the scholar bureaucrat informs the way that the government is structured now. And what I mean by that is, scholar bureaucrats are people who went to Beijing, they got all trained up, and then they would go out to the far-flung regions of China and they would implement government policy. So this tradition of technocracy, this tradition of we're the central government, we got ourselves all trained up and we're going to go out and fix things, that's a strong tradition in China that's thousands of years old. So ideology of the CCP is overstated. Okay, so the second premise that I want to talk about is something called stovepiping. I mentioned a moment ago that I was going to flag some things that I had not heard of, or terms that I hadn't heard of. Stovepiping is definitely a term you could use when doing research on both the economy and also the political system in China. And so the idea of stovepiping is that there is vertical sharing of information up and down chains of command within China and within the CCP. There is not horizontal sharing of information in the way that we think about it. And so stovepiping is this notion that you can vertically share up and down, but you don't share across. And this is going to be a theme that we'll sort of get at kind of throughout this, that there's a lot of up and down mass line. Remember the mass line from John's lecture? So there's a lot of that is embedded in the structures. Third important principle in PRC governance is that the ranks of officials matter to their ability to influence other officials. So if I'm operating in China as a part of the Central Military Commission, I can tell people, so I'm on the Central Military Commission, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I'm up here. I can tell people below me stuff. I can tell them what to do. I can issue directives. I can't, however, if I'm here and over here is the paramilitary police force as a separate entity, I can't tell them what to do. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, why do you think that matters? What do you think that does? How do you think that affects the way the government works? Do you think it makes it easier for policies to get implemented? Do you think it makes it harder for policies to get implemented? There were some murmurings. Yeah. Yeah, good. So there might be a benefit in that you can have really good control of people that were within your jurisdiction. What about policy coordination? Do you think that is easy or difficult given that? Yeah.
Difficult because you can't have these horizontal chains to get people to work together. It has to go up and come back down again.
Exactly, right? In the United States, for example, when 9/11 happened, there was a big debate about the FBI and CIA not sharing information. It was called the wall, and that made it difficult. So we fixed that. In China, there's less of that kind of coordination, and that may make it a little bit more difficult to actually accomplish things. And then two additional things that are principles. One is called democratic centralism. I mentioned a moment ago I was going to use some different language than what John used in his lecture, but similar ideas. So democratic centralism is another way of thinking about the mass line. So democratic centralism as a concept is this idea that the masses, like y'all, the masses, are going to provide input, suggestions. You're going to, sort of talk about what you think needs to be done, and that's going to filter up. Who's it going to filter up to, do you think, in China? The CCP, yeah. So it's going to filter up to the CCP. So that's the first part of democratic centralism. That's the democratic part. The centralism part is once that information bubbles up, the CCP establishes policy and tells the masses what those policies are. So input comes up from the people, policy is established, policy directives directed back down to the people. What do you think if the people disagree with that policy that came out of it? What do you think happens? They are jailed. No, they're jailed or shot or something. So does that make sense? So, well, maybe it doesn't make sense, but so democratic centralism is this idea that once the policy is established, you get on board. There's no going rogue in China, right? So policy comes down, you have to abide by that. It's very difficult to challenge policy once it's been established. That is the same principle that John was describing of the mass line, where Mao took in information from people, established policy, and sent it back down. But the idea is you get all on board with this or not, and then you're jailed or you're shot. I'm exaggerating. Did everyone hear the hyperbole there? All right, fine. A little bit, not really. All right. This is my sarcastic voice. You may hear it in there. Okay, so the last principle in PRC governance is the notion that it is document-based governance. And what I mean by this is there is a strong tradition amongst the CCP higher-ups, and we'll talk about who those people are and what parts of organizations they are. But there's a tradition that stuff isn't final until there's a document about it. Now, this may sound like a weird thing for me to have shared, but the reason why this is important is if a leader is giving a speech and they say, we're going to adjust economic policy to address inflation, people know that doesn't really mean much until that's committed to some sort of a document. This can complicate or slow up the process of governance. And as we'll talk about in a moment, obviously, hopefully it's obvious, there might be some implications for how diplomatic engagement and economic engagement might actually be able to work. I've also put up here Sunnyland. Have any of you done any topic reading and encountered that word, Sunnyland? No? Not yet? Okay. I can almost guarantee you that you will. And that people have started referring to it without a ton of descriptor, I think everyone knows what it is. Sunnyland is actually a place in California. How many of you are from California? Is it sunny there? That's a lot of people from California. Is it sunny there? Okay. So apparently there's a particularly sunny place called Sunnyland. And it's actually, the reason why there's referenced in topic literature is within the last couple of years, President Obama and Xi met there in order to have kind of a big old summit where they just talked about stuff. And so you'll see references to Sunnyland, but a lot of the talking has not yet translated into specific policies because it has not necessarily gotten to this document-based part of it. All right, any questions so far? Yeah?
What's the justification for that document-based governance? Why do they claim they do that?
It kind of goes back to the scholar bureaucrat biz that I was talking about, where for thousands of years, do y'all have a mental map of China in your head? Okay, it's ginormous. And we think of China as this like monolithic, singular like thing, but there's actually a lot of ethnic heterogeneity in China. And so this sort of notion of you get some scholar bureaucrats, they go out, is the foundation for this notion. Those scholar bureaucrats, those technocrats, need to have some, it's not up there anymore, need to have some documents that allow them to say this is what we are doing, so that no matter whether you're in far East China or far West China, you're sort of adopting and implementing the same sorts of policies.
And can that just be writing down speech and filing it in a record, or does it have to be more rigorous than that?
It's a little bit more rigorous than that. So it's not just like there has to be a transcript of it, but rather that there's agreed upon that they hash out the details of it. Other questions? Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things about what this might mean for debate, right? Sometimes these topic lectures are like, nah, tell me about how I'm going to go for this in the 2-1-R. So I'm not going to do that, but there are a couple of implications about what we've said so far for debate. The first is, some of what we were just talking about. Diplomatic and economic engagement are complicated by the structure of the CCP and the basic principles of Chinese governance. Solvency arguments, maybe most of these are defensive, but again, with this sort of idea, if you keep these things in the back of your mind, and come January, you read an article, maybe it'll help you to sort of think about how you can make some of these things more offensive in nature. We've kind of talked a little bit about the Chinese politics dissad and ways to answer it. The primary animating challenges to the CCP are corruption, economic growth, which John talked a bit about, political participation. These are all challenges to the legitimacy of the CCP. They're sources of instability. But the principles that we've already talked about, that's how the CCP manages those threats. Does that make sense? So yeah, they've got these sources of instability, but those principles that we've talked about so far are kind of how the CCP deals with that. And so for the Chinese politics dissad, I think there's got to be a lot of sort of thought given to in what ways will the CCP mismanage these things to actually trigger the dissad. So these cards that are like the CCP is going to collapse, probably they're going to react before it actually collapses. So maybe the sort of fracturing of the CCP or fracturing of the country is a different way to go about it. And then a lot of other things that we probably haven't thought of yet. Just saying. Okay, so I want to talk now more systematically about the CCP structure. A couple of basic things. The same human beings wear CCP hats and state institution hats. I don't know if they actually have different hats that they wear. John and Mr. Rogers. Yeah, you remember how he used to come in his house and he'd change his sweater? This is how I envision CCP leaders, that when they head over to the state institutions, they change Mr. Rogers style into, a different hat or sweater. But it's the same human being, so their power in the state institutions is fundamentally derived from the CCP power that they have. The CCP is also driven, both in terms of stability and instability, policy choices, is driven by something called generational leadership changes. When Mao died, the CCP was like, maybe we should have thought a little bit more about this secession thing and what we're going to do as people are dying. John mentioned that the individuals that became the foundation of the CCP were sort of forged in the fire of various wars and conflict, right? And so that influenced, when Mao died, who it was that took over. But as we get more distant from the 20th century, there are still more people that are kind of coming up through the ranks. So the CCP decided to be systematic about it. So they have what are called generational leadership transitions. 2012-2013 was the most recent. And there's another one coming in 2017. Before I talk about kind of what the parameters of these changes are, the first leadership change, like the Chinese identified the first leadership change as the Cultural Revolution. This was unofficial. Remember John talking about the Cultural Revolution, the sort of like when the youngsters made the Red Book, and they went and sort of tried to impose more ideological allegiance to things. That was sort of an unofficial leadership transition. The second one actually happened around Tiananmen Square in 1989. What did John say happened in Tiananmen Square? Or what do you know about Tiananmen Square? Yeah? Yeah, so if y'all are interested in things like documentaries and stuff, there's a really good documentary called The Tank Man that talks about Tiananmen Square, and it also talks about a lot of the post-Tiananmen Square stuff and the censorship that's occurred and that people aren't taught about it, etc. And so another way to read Tiananmen Square is that there was an effort to crack down on the protesters to show strength. Why during a leadership transition do you think leaders would have an incentive to show strength? Yeah?
Just establish a power base by showing that how those bond the threats to their dominance.
Yeah, exactly. And if they don't establish it, then, you know, what's going to happen?
It makes their authority.
Yeah, and then they're going to revolt, right? And they're going to like trash the government and stuff. How many of you have ever had like a substitute teacher come in and then like as soon as their back is like turned, you're like, oh yeah, we're going to do 52,000 things that are terrible. I mean, you know, not so bad, but okay. So that's essentially the same logic-ish. So the idea that they needed to establish it. Now, 2002, there was another leadership transition. That was relatively peaceful. 2012, relatively peaceful as well, but we're still, that one's a little bit dicier, as we'll talk about here in just a second. Okay, so a couple of parameters in the leadership transitions. They have recently added age requirements. So basically, you can't serve in the upper echelons of the CCP if you are older than 67. None of the people that were a part of the leadership transition in 2012 were older than 62. The reason for this is that there is also a term limit requirement. So you may want to jot down it's 2 5-year terms. 2 5-year terms. So Xi came into power in 2012.
Does that mean you can no longer serve when you're 67, or you can't be appointed if you're older than 67?
Can't be appointed when you're older than 67. If you're in your middle of your term, then you can like serve it out, but that's why they won't appoint anybody older than 62. So math of that, I don't like math, but just math of that, like that makes sense, right? So they also have this 2-term limit. So Xi came into power in 2012 as a part of this leadership transition. He and Li, who is the sort of second in command, also came in. They are young enough that they can serve a second term. So Xi and Li, L-I, are likely to serve until 2022, which is going to be their next leadership transition. So the age requirements plus the term limits influence who gets picked to actually make the transition. The transitions can get dicey, you know, as we kind of already talked about. We're in one now still, even though it's 2016. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that Xi has done in order to consolidate his power. Okay, so think of the CCP as a pyramid. This pyramid reflects democratic centralism. The bottom of the pyramid in the CCP is called the Party Congress. Technically, there's also probably a base here, which are the regional and provincial and like city party assemblies that actually elect people to the party congress. The party congress will meet in 2017. Huge big deal. Only meets every 5 years. Really big deal. There are, in the last one, 2,270 delegates. The National Party Congress starts the leadership transition. And they do that by electing the Central Committee. Hey, sleeping kid. Yeah. Oh, there's 2 of you. Nice, excellent. Now there's not. So the Central Committee is elected out of the Party Congress, 205 members, 171 alternate members. Do y'all know nesting dolls? Okay, so think of the CCP as kind of like a nesting doll. So the Central Committee are people who were also at the Party Congress, almost always. So they're contained within. Okay, so the Central Committee is important because it selects the next level, which is the Politburo. This is where the power really starts in the CCP, is the Politburo. By the way, the National Party Congress elects the Central Committee. Right after that, in 2017, the Central Committee will have a meeting. It's called a plenum, P-L-E-N-U-M. And at that first plenum is when they elect the Politburo. Politburo, 25 members. Any of you baseball fans? Okay, so the Politburo is kind of like AAA for the Standing Committee, which is going to be the next level up. And what I mean by that is all those people who they need to transition up move from the Central Committee up to the Politburo, and then they're sort of in line to be considered for some of the other positions. So the Politburo has 25 members, and the Politburo is significant because it, like I said, is kind of the testing ground for people. And I want to talk in a little bit more detail about these top 3 parts of the pyramid. So the Politburo, 25 most powerful people. It includes the 7 most powerful people that are on something called the Standing Committee. And then there are also 18 other, like, AAA players. The Central Committee is probably like AA. If you're like a real baseball fan. All right, fine. The Development League, if you're a basketball fan. All right, so enough analogies. You all get it? Okay, all right, good. So one of the guiding principles of the Politburo that actually is also true of the Standing Committee and the Party General Secretary is this notion or this principle, and this is actually written down in the governing documents, the principle of combining collective leadership with individual responsibility based on division of work. So this is kind of the guiding principle of the Standing Committee. They very much, or I'm sorry, of the Politburo, they very much view all 25 people as being important for doing stuff. Remember, a big, far-flung country dealing with a lot, and they come together to lead, and each of them also have individual responsibilities. So this is a really important premise of the upper echelons of the CCP. This is also why you can get blamed for stuff. So Bo, who was a prominent figure that was a part of the Standing Committee, actually got ousted because of corruption charges. And he was sort of in line, rising power. His wife also got tried for murder, on murder charges, because she maybe murdered a business person. It's like a thing, I don't know. And so, you are also held individually accountable, so you can't hide behind the collective leadership. And so there are portfolios that each are assigned. Do y'all know what a portfolio is? Who can tell me what a portfolio is? Or context clues from this? What do you think? Yes?
Would be like your set of work duties that you have to do.
Perfect. That's exactly right. So it's the set of work duties that you're expected to do. Some of these portfolios for the Politburo are party, some are geographic. They're in charge of different regions in the country. Some are actually related to the military as well. And the reason why I flagged this for you is, as you're doing research on the topic, you're going to encounter particular people who are responsible for different areas. What could you do with those people's names? Search terms, yeah, good. I heard a couple of people mutter that. So you could use those people's names as search terms. So if you're doing work on the South China Sea, you know, you're part of the impact generic, and you're doing work on the South China Sea, and you know, or you run across the person who is responsible on the Politburo for military stuff, you could use that as a search term. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. This is also where the standing committee comes from. Any questions about the Politburo? Yeah.
Not about the Politburo. How does one join the party congress?
I'm sorry, what?
How does one join the party congress?
Oh, you get elected from the sort of provincial level, the local level, villages, cities, etc. They have their own like parties. I mean, not like with bouncy houses and stuff, but they have their own like assemblies where they elect the people out of to go to the party congress. Other questions? Yeah.
There was no step in between Central Committee and Politburo, right?
The Central Committee elects the Politburo
Got it, thank you.
based on the people that the Politburo and the Standing Committee told them to elect. Sorry, I should have said that. So the Central Committee is a little bit competitive. So National Party Congress elects the Central Committee. Do y'all remember that? Yeah? Okay. So the Politburo tells the National Party Congress, here's some candidates. And it's kind of democratic because they give 10% more names to the National Party Congress than there are seats on the Central Committee. Does that make sense? So it's like, all right, we're going to do like this, and out of this group of people, you've got to get this group of people. All right. So then the Central Committee elects the Politburo, but the Politburo and the Standing Committee have given the names of the people that are going to get elected to the Central Committee. Does that make sense? Do y'all know the phrase rubber stamp? Okay, so the Politburo is basically a rubber stamp, or the Central Committee basically rubber stamps the Politburo. All right, Standing Committee. 7 most powerful people. These people are the ones that Mr. Rogers style are a part of the state institutions too. Changing their hats, their sweaters when they go over to the state institutions, but their power derives from their CCP participation. These 7 people are ranked, like most super awesome to, you know, we tolerate you on the Standing Committee. Does that make sense? Like 1 through 7. Did you hear the sarcastic voice part? Okay, all right. See, it's pretty easy to pick up on. Okay. So the second ranked person is the premier of the state council, which is a state institution we'll talk about. He's like second in command, Lee. Is Lee going to be done in the next leadership transition, or does he get to continue? What did I say a moment ago? Continue, yeah. So he gets to continue. He manages the state bureaucracy, and he is effectively China's top economic official. So you could use his name as a search term, definitely going to come up. He also is under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of people that think that the Standing Committee and the other economic officials in China don't know what the heck they're doing with this fast growth that's happening, or managing the slowdown in the fast growth. You're going to get to hear about the Chinese economy, and I assume some discussion of currency and currency exchange rates and things like that. Very important that there's a lot of pressure on Lee, because there's a lot of questions about whether or not he knows what he's doing, whether or not they're effectively managing the value of their currency. There are also 4 other members that cover different portfolios that I'm not going to talk in any detail about. So, number 1 ranked guy is the party general secretary. He's top ranked. This is Xi. He came into power in 2012. He's got actually like a lot of hats. So he serves concurrently as the chair of the party and the state central military commissions, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. The party and the state central military commissions, those have like identical memberships. He's also the state president. All of the jobs he has, the reason why he has any legitimacy or power at all is because he's the Secretary General. Does that make sense? So it's not like he walks around and says, so, totally the president, should do what I say. He may go around and say, I am the General Secretary, you will do what I say. But the source of his power and legitimacy comes from the General Secretary position. Because of his age, like I said a moment ago, he's going to likely serve until 2020. Now I say likely because like something could happen. I mentioned Bo, corruption, pressure, the economy collapsing should result in him not being allowed to be the party general secretary again. And so when I commented that CCP collapse may be less likely, certainly there's a leadership transition argument to be made, I think, about why it is that the pressure on him may mean that he doesn't get to continue to be party general secretary. Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad. Yeah.
Does the party general secretary normally serve as the chairman of those commissions?
Yes.
Or is that
Since 1993, the answer is yes. Well, actually, since 1993, that position has also been the state president. Because apparently, like, up until 93, it was very confusing to other heads of state who they were supposed to talk to. And so they just decided in 93 to have the party general secretary also be the president. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. The answer is yes. Since the 82 constitutional changes and some of the other CCP changes, my understanding is yes, that they've all been the same person and been the chair of all of that. Other questions? Okay. So I've made mention a couple of times to the Central Military Commission. And so I'm going to talk now about the PLA. Now, this may seem weird to you, that I just was talking about the CCP, and now I'm talking about their military. So the PLA is an arm of the party, not the state. I'm going to let that sink in a little bit. That should seem weird to you, because it would be like saying that the US military was under the control of the Republican or the Democratic Party, and they're the ones that got to make decisions about what the PLA did, as opposed to the government being the one that's in charge. As far as I know, this is a very unique structure that very few, if any, other countries replicate. So the PLA, the Chinese Communist Party, they're the ones with the guns, not the state institutions. What do you think that means? And then I'll get your question. What do you think that means for the stability of the CCP? Yes, very stable, right? Because if there are threats, they're the ones that actually have the military behind them. Unlike state institutions, the state institutions, don't. You have a question?
Does the state not control any circumstances military power?
Nope. So, the PLA stands for the People's Liberation Army. The CMC is the Central Military Commission. This is a commission within the CCP. Who have we said is in charge of it? G. So he is in charge of the party and he heads up the CMC. And so the history that you just learned about the trajectory of the Chinese Civil War, Mao's leadership, all that, the protracted conflicts, that's a big part of the reason why the PLA is a part of the CCP and not a part of the state institutions. And it's also an important source of power, obviously, we'll talk about for the CCP and for Xi. And Xi is making himself more powerful vis-a-vis the PLA. In January and February of 2016, Xi started a pretty radical restructuring of the PLA command structure. I put a big asterisk by that in your notes, because that's like a really big deal. It enhances his power, and it has implications for the diplomatic engagement, arms control, dialogue stuff as well. So the first thing that Xi did in January of 2016 was he got rid of kind of the 4 big command units that were part of the PLA. Then in February, he got rid of some more regional command. You're welcome to sit. The regional command that also governed the PLA, he got rid of those. He replaced them with 15 committees within the CMC. Why do you think replacing those big commands, which by the way were run by generals, replacing them with 15 committees under the CMC, why do you think that would help? Somebody else who hasn't answered a question. Yeah, he has a lot more direct control, right? He's at the top of the CMC, and remember we talked about that vertical decision-making stuff? Do y'all remember that way back in the beginning of the hour? So that vertical decision-making stuff is very important. So Xi's consolidation is significant and is designed to have significant, powerful effects. This matters to the topic not, by the way, because I think military engagement is topical. That'll be a big debate. Things that are military versus things that are diplomatic. Doing nice military things doesn't make it diplomatic. Does that make sense? I will boldly assert. There's a debate to be had. But it does matter because there are important implications to diplomatic engagement, as I mentioned, some of the strategic dialogue, things like that. All right, any questions about the PLA? Yeah.
Does the term PLA also constitute the Air Force and the Navy as well, or are they considered separate entities?
It's all the same. I was going to include a graphic that showed the expansion of the number of personnel that are part of the naval component of the PLA. The reason why that's significant is that part of these changes in the structure, the stuff that I've read about it, Xi did it because he wants to be able to forwardly deploy the Chinese military. Does anyone know what forward deployment means? That's a great term of art you should probably write down. Forward deployment is the ability to project your military beyond your own borders. And a key component of forward deployment is a blue water navy. China used to have a brown water navy, which meant they could only get a couple 100 miles off their coast. But now they are getting that capacity for a blue water navy so that they can forward deploy and stuff. So the dynamic of, whether it's ground troops versus the Navy, that dynamic is also changing. Other questions? Okay, so state institutions. There's a reason why this is at the end, and it's going to go by real quick. What's the reason? Yeah, CCP is where it's at, right? They're the ones that have the power. The state institutions don't have a lot of power. So you'll notice that I have labeled this slide stated hierarchy. 82 Constitution says National People's Congress, which is their legislature. I was using air quotes if you weren't looking at me. Which is their legislature. They are stated as being at the top of all of the state institutions. The state president and vice president are below that, and then you can see the other institutions. So a couple of things about the National People's Congress. There are 3,000 delegates, and they mostly rubber stamp stuff. They also meet every 5 or so years, so pretty infrequently. And they just had a meeting in March of 2016. Again, I told you I was going to flag stuff I didn't really know. I also told you, I teach this, and so this is something I should have known. At the same time that the National People's Congress meets, they call it 2 sessions. So the National People's Congress meets, and then there's also something called the Political Consultative Session. Political Consultative Session. which is made up of experts, academics, other people, and those 2 sessions occur simultaneously in Beijing. And the idea is it's supposed to give the impression that they're getting a bunch of expertise to inform what's happening at the NPC, the National People's Congress. So this political consultative group also met in March of this year. So both of those would be search terms for you to use because they laid out the next 5-year economic plan. It's called the 13th economic plan, or the 13th 5-year plan, which is the economic plan. 13th 5-year plan. They've got 12 other ones. They came up with the 13th. I don't know if there will be lots before them or not. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the National People's Congress yet? I am so glad that you asked, because you allowed me to not fake segue into this. So this is the reality, right? And so his question about the state central military commissions, you'll notice that the reality of power is not, well, first you'll notice the National People's Congress is down here, on par with the state council, the state people's, or the Supreme People's Court. Not a ton of power there. Although the court's an interesting, evolving entity in China, but the Communist Party is kind of above everything. You can see sort of offset the party and state central military commission. So to answer your question more directly, they're sort of a combo thing, and it's the same people. All right, other questions about this reality? Yeah?
What's the difference between the Supreme Court and the People's Procuratorate?
Sorry, the slide cut off. That is the entity that prosecutes corruption. The Supreme People's Court is the judges that listen to some of the cases. Okay, other state things without power. Xi is the state president. I mentioned in '93 they did that because other countries didn't know who they should talk to. The VP is a woman named Li. She is part of the Politburo, but not a part of the standing committee. The reason why I mentioned her is that she's been entrusted with the foreign affairs portfolio that's a part of the state council. And the state council is kind of like the U.S. cabinet on steroids. What I mean by that is they have a lot more individual power to control things within their portfolio than, say, the Secretary of State does here, or the Secretary of the Treasury does here, etc. Okay, so if you weren't listening to anything that I just said, then the BBC is a British news source. They have a fairly comprehensive and interactive diagram that allows you to click on, and it'll explain the important things that are a part of that. I still have a few more things to say in the 2 minutes that I have, but if you weren't listening to any of that, that's a good thing. I'm going to, by the way, circulate to your lab leaders these diagrams that I've been kind of using, and I'll include this link so that you can have access to that as well. But I do want to talk just briefly about what this all means for debate, because that's, why you're here. The important thing about some of what we've been talking about is that the system that they have fosters a lot of clientelism. Anybody ever heard that word before? If somebody is a client of like a doctor or an attorney, what are they doing?
You generally contract that professional to do a job for you. So if it's a doctor, you've asked that person to perform an operation on themselves.
Yeah, so in political terms, clientelism means that political officials cultivate relationships with people to get support. And they cultivate relationships to get support by giving them stuff. So if I wanted to expand my debate team at Jesuit And I was like, hey, if you join the debate team, you can have a brand new car. I did not do that at all. And some of you are like, I don't live a place where a car really is like a thing. So how about a giant screen TV if you join the debate team? The support that they have and the interest they have in debate is only centered on that. So, analogously, this has an implication to economic engagement. Businesses in China benefit from their relationship with the CCP. These relationships then mean that businesses do stuff that the CCP says. It also means that CCP family members benefit. And there's a term that's used in China called princelings. Sometimes you'll see this in the news because these princelings have like a ton of cash. Because they're from these like really high up families in the CCP. And so they'll go like hang out in Europe or the United States. They'll like trash some hotel rooms, you know, generally have fun. And they sometimes will make the news. And so this is a source of controversy in China. And one of the fracture points for the CCP is that they're not handling the princelings very well. So tomato, tomato, clientelism, corruption, kind of the same thing. Or it has manifested itself similarly in China. So there's been a huge effort on the part of Xi to undertake what's called an anti-graft effort. So graft is another word for corruption. So anti-graft campaigns that Xi's been undertaking are designed to try to get rid of this perception that the CCP is corrupt. For example, just since 2013, he's removed 41 serving generals in the PLA on corruption charges, which is really significant in the last couple of years. And he's also undertaken such an extensive anti-corruption campaign that people have created handy-dandy graphics. So this graphic is a graphic of all of the people that are currently or have been a part of the, I can't see that at all. Can you see it a little bit? All right. So anyway, you can put your, I just thought this was like cool, so I kind of wanted to show it. You can put your cursor on somebody. This represents an actual human being, Ling, and the lines represent their connections to other people that are part of corruption pros. The phrase that's used and been used by Xi is tigers and flies. So if you're doing politics research in China or economy research, that phrase, tigers and flies, is the name of the anti-graft campaign, and he's seeking to target individuals. And in this particular tool, you can actually like look to see what kind of sector they have been involved in and what province they've also been involved in. But I just thought all the lines were cool. I mean, like, look at that. It's awesome. So then the other implication for debate is all the stuff we haven't thought of. See that like closure there, full circle. Does anybody have any questions about some of the implications for debate or anything about the state institutions that we kind of talked about at the end briefly? Going once? Yeah.
Is the anti-graft efforts mainly action against corruption or just to get them?
Yes. See what I did there? Yeah. So certainly, like, corruption has stymied or impacted negatively the economy. Has really impacted the, everyone's lifetime. So it really has affected the economy, but the effects on the economy have had follow-on effects to the political system. So Xi has sort of a like double incentive to try to actually address it. Yeah.
Where do these graphics draw the line between clientelism and graphic?
Wherever they want to. So I don't know if you noticed, like on that tool, like adultery was one of the like things, which is not something we typically think of as like inherent to corruption. But so it's sort of a how, and that part of the reason why the 41 generals were so significant is that a lot of people, commentators, think that, in the West at least, think that Xi is trying to, again, consolidate his control over the PLA as a way to be able to guide foreign policy a little bit differently. I wanted to say one last thing because that made me think of it that I wanted to say it earlier. There is an increasing number of Chinese scholars that are available and accessible to read, where there has been translated Chinese scholarship that is now accessible. We used to mostly only know stuff because it was people in the quote-unquote West looking at and making judgments. The availability, and I would encourage you to read some of that because it allows you to sort of get a different perspective on some of these things too. Okay, so I think that now we are going to talk about labs and introduce some of the lab leaders so that you can go and like actually, meet your